A man kneels alone on the edge of a frozen ocean, enveloped in a dark that has lingered unbroken for weeks on end. The ambient air around him sits at a temperature low enough to freeze exposed skin in mere minutes and claim a human life in under an hour. Yet he remains motionless. For the better part of a daylight that never truly rises, he has stood crouched over a small hole in the ice no wider than the palm of his hand. His harpoon is poised in his calloused grip, his chest rising and falling so slowly that the moisture of his breath barely leaves his lips. Below the thick sheet of white, the creature he waits for possesses hearing so acute it can detect the slight scrape of a leather boot against the surface from deep beneath the current. Everything his family will eat tonight, every drop of fat that will keep their living space above freezing, hinges entirely on the next few fleeting seconds. This was not an extraordinary crisis. It was simply a standard winter morning in the coldest territory human beings have ever successfully settled. How did a single culture make a permanent home on a coastline where the sea froze solid for 9 months out of the year, where no tree grew tall enough to yield a single wooden beam, and where a sudden shift in the wind could bring an end to a life before nightfall? The ancestors of the Inuit accomplished precisely that, maintaining their hold on the vast Arctic expanse from the Bering Sea all the way to the eastern cliffs of Greenland across thousands of years. For almost the entirety of their history, they possessed no forged iron, no agricultural land, no timber for fuel, and virtually no source of energy that was not harvested directly through the hunt. Yet, out of snow, bones, skin, and ice, they engineered one of the most sophisticated and complete survival systems the world has ever known. If you appreciate deep dives into forgotten history, traditional survival engineering, and the incredible ways our ancestors conquered the harshest landscapes on Earth, take a quick moment to hit the subscribe button for our channel. And down in the comments below, let us know where you are watching from today, whether you are braving a cold winter in Montana, Minnesota, or anywhere else across the globe. We read every comment, and your support helps us bring more of these incredible historical stories to life. To truly understand how human beings survived minus 70 degrees without a scrap of firewood, we have to look closely at the structure that sheltered them from the killer winds. The winter camp built upon the ocean ice was never chosen by chance. Long before a single knife was drawn, experienced trackers searched the frozen horizon for a very specific type of snow. They needed hard, dry, wind-packed drifts, the kind that produced a subtle ringing sound under the strike of a boot heel and could be sliced cleanly without crumbling into dust. They placed their encampments carefully in the lee of large pressure ridges where the terrain offered a natural shield against the violent gales, while staying within walking distance of the breathing holes kept open by wintering seals. Choosing the wrong patch of snow meant a shelter that would collapse, and choosing the wrong location meant a house that could never hold its heat. The construction of the igloo was a masterclass in structural engineering, executed by a single builder armed with nothing more than a long blade fashioned from bone or ivory. Rather than piling snow into a loose mound and digging out the center, the builder cut large, rectangular blocks directly from a shallow trench in the hard-drifted crust. Each block was carefully trimmed along its edges, angled slightly inward as it was set into place. Crucially, the builder laid these blocks not in flat, separate circular rings, but in a continuous, rising spiral. As the wall wound upward, every new block leaned against the one before it, locked firmly in position by its own weight and geometry, until the spiraling arch closed overhead at the crown with a final, custom-fitted keystone. Locked inside the newly sealed dome, the builder then carved his way out through a low, narrow tunnel dug deep beneath the level of the main floor. This sunken entry was not an arbitrary design choice. It served as a thermal cold trap. Because frigid air is denser and heavier than warm air, the extreme cold sank downward into the low entrance tunnel and was trapped there, unable to rise into the main living quarters. Meanwhile, the warmth generated inside gathered under the high dome and remained trapped above. A master builder could raise a completely windproof, structurally sound dome capable of supporting the weight of a grown man standing on its top in less than 2 hours, using nothing more than the frozen ground beneath his feet. Inside the snow house, life was arranged with meticulous order. Along the back wall sat the sleeping platform, built up from packed snow blocks and cushioned with thick layers of dried heather and caribou hides. Raised well off the floor, this platform positioned the family in the warmest pocket of air near the top of the dome, leaving the heavy chill to settle far below. Here, family members slept side by side beneath heavy fur quilts, pooling their body warmth like a single organism. Belongings hung safely from antler pegs driven directly into the hard snow walls, keeping gear dry and free from ground moisture. High up in the front wall above the low entrance, a translucent block of clear freshwater ice was fitted like a glass pane, casting a soft, cool daylight across the room, while a tiny vent hole poked through the roof allowed stale air and moisture to vent without bleeding away the ambient heat. Stay with us, because what powered the interior climate of these snow domes defies everything modern builders assume about heating a home. The true heart of the snow house was not a wood stove or a roaring campfire, but a shallow crescent dish carved from soft soapstone. This was the qulliq, the traditional oil lamp of the Inuit, and to understand its function is to understand how human life remained possible in the high Arctic. Soapstone was one of the few mineral resources harvested along specific coastal outcrops, prized for its ability to absorb and retain heat without cracking under sudden temperature shifts. Into this stone basin, the women placed pieces of raw seal blubber or whale fat. Along the long, straight rim of the dish, they meticulously arranged a thin, continuous wick made from dried tundra moss or the soft down of cotton grass. When lit and properly tended, the qulliq produced a low, golden flame that burned with incredible efficiency, generating virtually no smoke or soot. This modest flame was the sole source of heat, light, and cooking power in the entire dwelling. In an environment where external temperatures plunged to 40 or 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, a single well-maintained qulliq could lift the interior temperature of a tightly constructed snow dome to 50 or even 60 degrees Fahrenheit above zero. The heat was soft and steady, warm enough for liquid water to stand in a bowl and for children to rest comfortable beneath light furs, yet balanced so precisely against the cold outer air that the inner surface of the snow blocks merely glazed into a smooth, structural layer of hard ice rather than melting away. Maintaining this flame was a demanding craft that required decades of experience, a duty almost always held by the senior woman of the household. The wick had to be constantly trimmed, nudged, and adjusted using a small wooden or bone stick. It had to be broadened when the outside cold deepened, and trimmed low when the family slept. A neglected lamp would begin to smoke, coat the white walls in heavy black soot, and eventually go out. And in the dead of an Arctic winter, a dead lamp meant an icy dome, frozen gear, and potential disaster before sunrise. A woman renowned across neighboring camps for her ability to keep a clean, smokeless, and unwavering flame held immense status, for her skill was quite literally the line between life and death for her entire family. Suspended directly above that golden flame hung a stone pot or a skin basin filled with snow, slowly converting frozen precipitation into drinkable water. For outsiders traveling through the far north, liquid water was often assumed to be abundant in a landscape made of ice. But eating raw snow directly was a dangerous error. Ingesting sub-zero snow rapidly chilled a person's core body temperature, forcing the metabolic system to burn precious calories just to melt the ice inside the stomach. A hunter attempting to quench his thirst on snow alone would dehydrate rapidly while burning out his energy reserves. Because of this, every drop of drinking water during the winter months had to be painstakingly melted over the low flame of the oil lamp, drop by drop, from morning until night. Yet the Inuit also possessed an extraordinary piece of environmental knowledge that astonished early European explorers. They knew that sea ice, which begins its life completely saturated with salt, undergoes a natural purification process over time. As thick ice floes survive through consecutive summer seasons, the trapped salt brine slowly drains downward through microscopic channels in the ice under the force of gravity. By its second or third year, the upper portion of an old sea ice pack loses its salinity entirely, transforming into pure, dense, freshwater ice. Experienced hunters could spot this multi-year ice from great distances. While new, salty sea ice appeared milky, opaque, and brittle, old desalinated sea ice possessed a distinct, deep sapphire blue hue and a smooth, polished texture. Blocks harvested from these ancient blue flows melted down into pure, sweet drinking water, with far less energy than loose snow required. Settling a winter camp near a ridge of multi-year sea ice meant a reliable source of clean water, a resource as valuable in the frozen wilderness as a fertile well in the desert. All of this domestic stability, from the warmth of the qulliq to the structure of the snow dome, depended entirely on a single, continuous pursuit, the winter seal hunt. While many species migrated south as the northern ocean froze over, the ringed seal remained behind. To survive under a continuous sheet of ice that could stretch for hundreds of miles, the seal used the sharp claws on its front flippers to drill and maintain a series of breathing holes through the ice sheet. As the ice thickened throughout the winter, reaching depths of 3 to 6 feet, the seal continually scraped away the fresh ice from below, keeping a narrow, funnel-shaped passage open to the surface. These breathing holes were frequently concealed from human eyes beneath a thick blanket of wind-blown snow. Finding them required a partner whose senses far exceeded those of any human, the Arctic sled dog. Moving across the frozen ocean in sweeping arcs against the wind, a hunter relied on his dog to catch the faint scent of a seal's breath rising through the snow crust. When the dog paused and began sniffing intently at a specific patch of white, the hunter knew a breathing hole lay hidden beneath. Once a hole was identified, the hunter gently probed the snow layer using a long, slender indicator rod carved from flexible whalebone or ivory. He mapped the precise center of the opening far below without disturbing the surrounding snow cover, for if a seal detected the scent of human contact around its breathing hole, it would abandon the spot permanently and use an alternate hole miles away. After clearing a tiny opening through the top of the snow crust, the hunter carefully set an indicator, a tiny feather or a hair-thin sliver of bone directly over the waterline. Then began the grueling test of endurance, known as the weight. The hunter stood completely motionless over the hole, holding his heavy harpoon in both hands, sometimes for 6, 8, or 12 consecutive hours in temperatures far below zero. He stood so still that his joints stiffened and his breath slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm, for the slightest vibration transmitted through the ice sheet would alert the seal beneath. When the seal finally returned to breathe, its wet snout pushed upward into the narrow snow cavity, displacing the air and causing the delicate bone indicator to twitch. That tiny movement was the hunter's only signal. In a fraction of a second, he drove his heavy harpoon straight down through the snow layer with the full weight of his body. The harpoon was not a simple spear. It was a complex piece of precision engineering. At its tip sat a small, detachable head made of carved antler or ivory, armed with a sharp blade of slate or iron. This head rested loosely on the harpoon shaft and was connected to a long, tough line woven from braided seal sinew or rawhide. When the point penetrated the animal's hide, the tension on the line caused the toggling head to turn sideways beneath the skin and muscle, locking itself securely like a toggle bolt. As the wounded seal dived back into the black water below, the hunter detached the wooden shaft and held fast to the line, absorbing the powerful pulls of the animal until it was exhausted. Only then did he use his snow knife to widen the narrow hole and haul the heavy prize up onto the ice. When the long polar night finally broke and spring brought light back to the Arctic, the nature of the hunt shifted entirely. As the sun warmed the air, seals climbed out of their breathing holes to bask on the surface of the ice. On the open, featureless expanse, there was no cover behind which a hunter could hide. To close the distance, the Inuit developed a brilliant method of camouflage known as the stalk. The hunter dressed in soft, sealskin clothing and laid flat on his belly against the wet ice, pushing a small screen of white hide mounted on a light wooden frame ahead of him. As he slithered slowly forward, he monitored the seal's behavior intently. Every few minutes, the seal would raise its head to scan its surroundings for predators. The instant the animal shifted, the hunter froze in place. He mimicked the seal's own subtle movements, patting his hip against the ice like a flipper, scratching at the snow, and lifting his head in the exact cadence of a resting seal. By convincing the animal that he was merely another seal enjoying the sunshine, the hunter could spend over an hour crawling across 200 yards of open ice, closing the gap inch by inch, until he was within striking distance for his harpoon. While the seal provided the steady foundation of daily life, larger game required the coordinated efforts of entire communities. In regions where massive walruses gathered along the edge of the open sea ice, teams of men worked together using heavy harpoons attached to large, inflated floats made from whole airtight sealskins. These floats created immense drag in the water, preventing the powerful, tusked animals from diving deep or escaping beneath the ice pack until the hunters could close in for the final strike. During the short Arctic summer, when the sea ice broke apart into open water, the community launched the umiak. This was a large, flat-bottomed boat, measuring up to 30 feet in length, constructed from a light frame of salvaged driftwood or whale ribs, lashed tightly together with leather thongs, and wrapped in a tough, waterproof skin made from stitched walrus hides. Unlike the narrow, swift kayak used by individual hunters, the umiak was a stable, spacious vessel capable of transporting entire families, dogs, tents, and heavy gear across open bays. It was from these skin boats that the boldest crews pursued the largest creature in the northern seas, the bowhead whale. A single bowhead whale represented an incomprehensible mountain of resources, yielding tons of rich meat, dense blubber for fuel, strong baleen for crafting tools, and massive structural bones that could frame houses for generations. Operating in silence, the crew paddled the umiak within striking distance of the massive mammal as it surfaced to blow. The lead harpooner drove a massive toggling harpoon into the whale's flank, attached to a string of several inflated sealskin floats and a heavy drag stone. The floats dragged behind the giant creature every time it attempted to submerge, wearing down its strength and keeping it near the surface until the crew could maneuver alongside it. Nothing harvested from such a massive hunt was ever taken for granted or treated with carelessness. In the worldview of the Arctic, wasting any portion of an animal was considered a grave breach of respect toward the spirit of the creature that had allowed itself to be taken. The meat sustained the people and their working dogs. The blubber filled the stone lamps for months on end. The tough hide was converted into boat coverings, boots, and heavy ropes. The sinew running along the animal's spine was dried and split into thread stronger than any cotton string, and the internal organs were crafted into water-resistant containers, floats, and specialized garments. This deep reliance on fresh sea mammal meat carried a hidden biological benefit that baffled European sailors for centuries. During long voyages through frozen waters, Western crews frequently suffered from severe outbreaks of scurvy, a debilitating disease caused by a complete lack of vitamin C. Because no crops, fruits, or green vegetables could grow in the Arctic tundra, early explorers assumed the Inuit would naturally suffer from the same affliction. Yet the local populations remained entirely healthy through winters that lasted for months. The secret lay in how the food was prepared and consumed. While long, high-heat boiling destroys vitamin C, fresh, raw meat, particularly the skin and liver of sea mammals like the ringed seal and the beluga whale, contains significant concentrations of the essential nutrient. By consuming portions of their harvest fresh, raw, or lightly aged, the Inuit quietly fulfilled their body's chemical requirements without ever knowing what a vitamin was. Their dietary habits, refined over hundreds of generations, provided complete nutrition from a landscape that appeared entirely barren to outside eyes. To preserve the seasonal abundance of summer for the lean months of winter, the people relied on the land itself as a natural freezer. Hunters built stone caches across their hunting territories, sturdy, dome-shaped structures constructed from heavy boulders fitted tightly together. Meat and blubber were packed deep inside these stone structures, which were sealed with rocks so heavy that no scavenging Arctic fox or wolverine could pry them open. The permanently frozen subsoil beneath the rocks maintained a steady, sub-zero temperature year-round, preserving hundreds of pounds of food for future seasons. In addition to freezing, certain traditional foods were deliberately fermented under controlled conditions. In parts of Greenland, small seabirds known as dovekies were harvested by the thousands during the summer nesting season using long-handled nets. Hundreds of these whole birds were packed tightly into a freshly harvested seal skin, complete with their feathers and beaks. The air was squeezed out. The skin was sealed with a thick layer of blubber to prevent flies from reaching it, and heavy stones were piled on top. Left to ferment slowly in the cool earth for several months, the dish known as qulliq emerged by midwinter as a soft, highly prized delicacy, rich in protein and vital enzymes when fresh game was scarce. Every aspect of this survival system, from the skin boat to the stone cache, was made possible by a toolkit crafted almost entirely without metal or wood. In an environment devoid of forests, the Inuit turned to the animal kingdom for their raw materials. Bone, antler, ivory, and baleen replaced iron and timber. Flexible caribou antlers were carved into harpoon shafts, knife handles, and fish spears. Dense walrus ivory was shaped into delicate sewing needles, sled runners, snow goggles, and intricate mechanical toggles. Heavy whale ribs were used as structural rafters for semi-permanent earth homes and as side rails for heavy transport sleds. To shape these exceptionally tough materials, craftsmen used the bow drill, a brilliant, simple machine consisting of a small wooden or bone bow, a cord wrapped around a drill spindle, and a stone or wooden mouthpiece held firmly between the teeth. By gripping the mouthpiece to apply downward pressure on the spindle while moving the bow back and forth with one hand, the worker could spin the drill bit at high speeds, while keeping his second hand entirely free to hold the workpiece steady. With this compact tool, they could bore precise eyes through slender ivory needles, or carve complex interlocking joints into bone tool handles. Among these specialized tools, two held particular importance in daily life. The first was the igloo, the traditional curved knife used almost exclusively by women. Featuring a broad, crescent-shaped blade of polished slate or rare meteoric iron, fitted into a comfortable handle of carved antler or ivory, the igloo was designed to maximize downward pushing force rather than slicing motion. This shape allowed the user to cut cleanly through tough hide, dense blubber, and frozen meat, with minimal hand fatigue, making it the perfect instrument for skinning game, processing hides, and tailoring intricate garments. A well-crafted igloo was a cherished personal possession, often passed down from mother to daughter across multiple generations. The second crucial instrument was the slender bone sewing needle. Polished to a glass-like smoothness and drilled with an eye barely visible to the naked eye, these needles were the ultimate key to human survival in the cold. Without them, the entire system of Arctic clothing would have been impossible. The seams of winter garments had to be stitched with absolute perfection, using fine threads of split sinew that swelled when exposed to moisture, effectively sealing every needle hole against wind and water. A single loose seam or a broken thread in a winter coat could allow sub-zero wind to penetrate the insulation, quickly leading to frostbite or hypothermia. Inuit winter clothing was a multi-layered insulation system that rivaled any modern synthetic cold-weather gear. The primary material was harvested from the autumn caribou hunt, chosen because every individual hair of a caribou's winter coat is hollow, trapping a tiny pocket of stagnant air inside its structure. When thousands of these hollow hairs are packed densely together on a single hide, they create an insulating barrier of extraordinary warmth and remarkably low weight. A complete winter outfit consisted of two distinct layers. The inner layer, comprising a hooded shirt and trousers, was worn with the soft fur turned directly against the wearer's skin, trapping a stable envelope of warm air generated by body heat. The outer layer was worn with the fur facing outward to deflect the biting wind and shed drifting snow. The hood of the outer coat was trimmed with a thick ruffle of wolverine or wolf fur, selected specifically because the smooth guard hairs of these animals possess unique surface properties that prevent frost from clinging to them. As the wearer breathed out moisture in sub-zero air, the ice crystals could be easily brushed off the hood rim with a flick of a gloved hand, rather than freezing into a solid rim of ice around the face. The fit of these garments was engineered with loose, relaxed cuts at the neck, wrists, and waist. This allowed warm, moist air produced during heavy exertion to vent upward and out of the garment when the drawstrings were loosened. Preventing sweat was a critical safety priority in the far north. If a person perspired heavily while working or hunting, that moisture would quickly soak into the fur lining and freeze, solid the moment activity stopped, destroying the garment's insulating properties and chilling the wearer to the bone. For mothers caring for infants, this clothing system featured a unique design known as the amati. This heavy winter parka was tailored with an enlarged, built-in pouch positioned directly against the mother's upper back beneath the outer coat. Here, an infant could sit comfortably against the mother's warm skin, completely sheltered from the Arctic wind, without needing separate heavy clothing. If the child needed to nurse or sleep, the mother could easily shift the infant around to the front, inside the warm interior of the coat, without ever exposing the baby to the freezing air outside. In addition to cold weather fur gear, the Inuit crafted completely waterproof outer garments from an unexpected source: the dried intestines of seals or walruses. The long intestinal tubes were carefully cleaned, split open into flat strips, scraped thin, and dried until they became translucent and flexible. Women then stitched these thin strips together horizontally using fine needles and split sinew, creating an extremely lightweight, completely waterproof parka. This gut-skin coat was an essential piece of equipment for open-water kayaking. When a hunter sat inside his kayak, he pulled the bottom hem of his gut-skin coat tightly over the wooden cockpit rim and lashed it down with leather thongs, while tightening the hood around his face. This created a completely watertight seal between the paddler and the vessel. Even if a heavy wave swept over the deck, or the kayak rolled completely upside down in the icy sea, not a drop of water could penetrate the hull or reach the hunter's dry inner clothes. To protect their vision during the bright months of late spring, when the returning sun reflected blinding sunlight off vast fields of white snow and ocean ice, the people crafted specialized snow goggles. Carved from a single piece of wood, bone, or caribou antler, these goggles were shaped to fit snugly against the contours of the wearer's face, held in place by a thong of soft leather. Instead of open glass lenses, the goggles featured two thin, horizontal slits cut into the dark front surface. These narrow slits drastically reduced the amount of light entering the eyes, cutting through the intense glare and protecting the retina from snow blindness, an agonizing condition where ultraviolet radiation burns the surface of the cornea, causing temporary loss of sight and excruciating pain. Furthermore, the dark interior of the carved wood, soot-blackened on the inside, helped focus the viewer's vision, making distant game visible against the glaring white landscape. Moving across this brutal frozen landscape required transportation technologies that were just as carefully engineered as the shelters themselves. To navigate the open ocean during the brief summer thawing period, the Inuit constructed two distinct watercraft, each tailored for a specific mechanical purpose. The first was the single-seat hunting vessel known around the world as the kayak. The inner frame of the kayak was crafted from narrow pieces of salvaged driftwood or carved whale ribs, painstakingly bent using moisture and heat. Instead of rigid wooden pegs or metal nails, every joint in the frame was bound with thongs of braided animal sinew. This thong lashing system was a deliberate engineering choice. A completely rigid hull would snap under the violent twisting forces of rough Arctic swells, but a sinew-lashed frame possessed structural flexibility. The vessel could bend, twist, and absorb the impact of heavy waves without suffering a catastrophic fracture. Over this flexible wooden and bone skeleton, women stretched whole sealskins that had been carefully scraped of fat and hair, then sewn together using a specialized, double-lapped, waterproof stitch. When these wet skins dried, they shrank tightly across the frame, creating a drum-tight hull that was incredibly light. A single hunter could easily lift his kayak onto one shoulder and carry it over rocky shores or ice floes. In the water, it was exceptionally fast, nearly silent, and stable in experienced hands. On the upper deck, small bone pegs held harpoons, coiled lines, and inflated floats in precise positions, instantly accessible for a split-second strike. If a sudden wave or a thrashing sea mammal flipped the kayak upside down, a master paddler did not capsize or drown. Wearing his waterproof gut-skin parka lashed securely to the cockpit rim, he executed a fluid motion with his paddle, utilizing the buoyancy of his body and blade to roll the craft right side up in a matter of seconds, without taking on a single drop of water. This maneuver, known across the modern world as the kayak roll, was an essential life-saving technique, born out of necessity in waters, where immersion for more than 3 minutes meant death. While the kayak was designed for the solo hunter, land movement across the frozen ocean during the deep winter months depended entirely on the matching miracle of the dog team and the heavy sled. The working dog of the north, the qulliq, was not a domestic pet, but a powerful, heavy-boned working animal specifically bred across centuries for extreme cold resistance, raw physical endurance, and pulling power. Possessing a dense double coat consisting of a thick, woolly underfur and stiff guard hairs, these dogs could thrive in weather conditions that would kill standard domestic breeds. During night storms, when winds howled across the sea ice at 50 miles per hour, the dogs simply curled into tight balls on the open snow, tucking their bushy tails over their noses to trap their breath, allowing drifting snow to bury them in warm, insulating mounds until morning. The sled pulled by these dogs was called the qulliq, and its design reflected a deep understanding of structural mechanics. A qulliq consisted of 2 long, heavy, parallel runners fashioned from thick driftwood planks or whale jawbones, connected by a series of wooden or antler crossbars. Just like the kayak frame, these crossbars were never nailed or bolted down. They were lashed tightly to the runners using wet leather thongs. As the sled traveled over rough pressure ridges, jagged sea ice, and hard snow drifts, the entire structure flexed and twisted fluidly over the uneven surface, absorbing impacts that would shatter a rigid wooden sled into kindling. To reduce friction across sub-zero snow, the runners received a specialized surface treatment that early Western explorers watched in complete disbelief. First, a layer of soft tundra peat or wet mud was mixed into a smooth paste and pressed along the bottom edge of each runner, where it froze into a solid, durable base. The driver then smoothed this frozen mud layer using a bone scraper. Next, he took a mouthful of warm water or a damp hide sponge and carefully wiped a thin film of water along the runner. In the freezing air, this liquid instantly turned into a glass-smooth, microscopic glaze of clear ice. This ice-glazed mud runner slid across cold snow with almost zero friction, allowing a team of 6 or 8 dogs to pull heavy loads, weighing many hundreds of pounds over immense distances, with minimal fatigue. The driver did not manage his team using reins or heavy whips. Steering was accomplished entirely through vocal commands directed at a trusted lead dog. The driver spoke to his lead dog by name, calling out specific directional phrases to turn the team left or right, speed up, or halt. He carried a long whip made of braided rawhide, but it was rarely used to strike the animals. Instead, a skilled driver flicked his wrist to snap the whip through the air, producing a sharp, loud crack near the left or right side of the team to guide their course. Beyond pulling loads, the dog team served as an early warning system against invisible hazards. As the sled moved across snow-covered sea ice, a driver monitored his dogs with extreme concentration. If the dogs suddenly lifted their heads, perked their ears, or refused to step onto a specific patch of snow, the driver halted immediately. The dogs could sense thin ice, concealed cracks, or the faint scent of an approaching polar bear long before human eyes or ears could register the threat. A family's survival on a long journey routinely rested on trusting the instincts of their lead dog over their own visual judgment. To an outsider standing on the Arctic tundra in midwinter, the endless expanse of white snow looked completely featureless, a flat and terrifying void where every direction appeared identical. But to an Inuit traveler, that same windswept plain was covered in clear, readable signposts. The powerful Arctic winds blew with relentless consistency from specific prevailing directions across the season. As these gales scoured the surface of the snow, they carved hard, raised ridges called sastrugi that ran parallel to the direction of the wind. These hard snow ridges acted as permanent physical compass lines fixed across the landscape. A traveler moving through a blinding whiteout, where the sky and ground blended into a single uniform sheet of gray light and all visual horizons vanished, could maintain a straight course simply by monitoring the angle at which his sled runners or boots crossed these sastrugi ridges beneath his feet. Even without seeing the sun or stars for weeks at a time, a navigator could travel for 50 miles across open ocean ice and hit his destination with pinpoint accuracy by reading the texture of the snow beneath his soles. Where natural features were absent, the people marked the landscape with their own enduring stone structures known as inuksut. These were standing figures constructed from unworked field stones, piled carefully upon one another to form distinct shapes that could be seen from miles away across the flat tundra. An inuksuk was never built casually. Every arrangement carried a specific, vital message for anyone traveling through the territory. Some small, simple stone cairns pointed the way to a hidden cache of preserved meat buried beneath nearby rocks, or indicated a reliable freshwater stream where fish gathered under the ice. Larger, human-shaped stone figures, set high on elevated ridges, acted as navigational beacons, visible against the horizon during poor weather, to guide lost hunters back towards safe camp locations or around treacherous stretches of thin sea ice. Others were arranged in long, converging lines that stretched across miles of open valley floor. During the summer months, when caribou herds migrated across the tundra, these long stone lines acted as artificial funnels. To a distant caribou, the standing stone figures resembled human hunters standing in the brush. Frightened by these silent stone silhouettes, the migrating herds were channeled down the narrowing corridor into shallow river crossings or narrow valley passes, where waiting hunters hidden in pits could ambush the animals at close range. Because an inuksuk was a life-saving piece of public infrastructure, destroying or tampering with one was considered an unpardonable violation of tribal law, a betrayal of every traveler who would come after. While winter life centered around the sea ice, the turning of the sun brought a complete shift in architecture and geography. As the ocean ice melted and broke apart in late spring, the dense winter camps dissolved. Families packed their gear onto skin boats and moved inland, following the melting river systems toward the caribou grazing grounds and salmon runs. During the warm months, they lived in light, portable tents called tupiks, constructed from stitched caribou or sealskins, draped over a light frame of wooden poles or whale ribs. If you are enjoying this deep dive into native engineering and traditional survival systems, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button for our channel. If you have ever attempted off-grid camping or braved sub-zero weather yourself, drop a comment below and share your experience. We love hearing stories from our viewers, and your interactions help our channel bring more of these long-forgotten historical accounts to light. As autumn approached and temperatures began to plunge toward freezing once again, but before the snowpack was firm enough to cut blocks for igloos, the people transitioned into a third type of dwelling altogether, the karmak. The karmak was a semi-subterranean turf house that combined the thermal mass of the earth with structural bone framing. To construct a karmak, the builders dug a broad, shallow pit 2 or 3 feet into the tundra soil. Around the perimeter of this pit, they raised low, thick walls constructed from stacked field stones, heavy blocks of tundra sod, and compacted earth. The roof was framed using massive whale jawbones, or curved ribs anchored into the turf walls, over which they draped heavy skin coverings topped with an outer layer of soil, moss, and drying snow. By sinking the living space deep into the earth and surrounding the walls with thick sod, the karmak utilized the earth's natural ground temperature as an insulating buffer against the raging autumn storms. The heavy turf walls absorbed the internal heat produced by the qulliq stone lamps during the day and radiated it back into the living quarters overnight. This semi-permanent dwelling provided a dry, remarkably warm refuge during the volatile transition months when neither the summer-hide tent nor the winter snow house could offer adequate protection. When Western trappers, whalers, and early military personnel first attempted to build shelters in these same northern latitudes during the 1800s and 1900s, they routinely defaulted to the construction styles they knew best: single-walled timber cabins built from felled pine logs or imported sawn lumber. The results were frequently disastrous. A standard wooden cabin built in the Arctic suffered from severe thermodynamic flaws. First, dry wood. While a decent insulator in mild climates, possesses a relatively poor thermal mass compared to packed earth or thick snow. In sub-zero temperatures with 50-mile-per-hour winds, heat from a central wood stove radiated quickly through the wooden walls and escaped into the atmosphere. Second, standard rectangular cabins featured flat floors set directly on the ground with level entry doorways. Every time the door opened, the heavy, sub-zero outer air rushed straight inside across the floor, sweeping away the warm air mass and plunging the floor level to freezing temperatures. Furthermore, traditional wood stoves required vast quantities of dry timber, a luxury that simply did not exist on the treeless tundra. Early settlers were forced to spend immense amounts of energy hauling firewood across hundreds of miles or burn through their limited fuel reserves in a matter of weeks. When their fires burned down overnight, the interior temperatures inside these wooden cabins dropped so rapidly that liquid water froze solid inches from the stove, and condensation from human breath coated the inner wooden walls in thick sheets of white frost. In stark contrast, the physics governing the Inuit snow dome were far superior for extreme cold survival. Packed snow is not solid ice. It is composed of nearly 90% trapped air held within a crystalline lattice. Trapped, stagnant air is one of the most effective natural thermal insulators in existence. The thick snow walls of an igloo possess such high insulating efficiency that the intense cold outside could not penetrate the structure, while the soft heat from a single blubber lamp was trapped completely within the upper dome. The catenary arch shape of the igloo was equally brilliant from a mechanical perspective. Unlike a square wooden box with flat walls that suffer from structural shear stress under heavy wind loads, a catenary dome distributes weight and wind pressure evenly along its continuous curve down to the ground. When powerful Arctic gales slammed into an igloo, the wind slid smoothly over the rounded dome without finding flat surfaces to push against. In fact, as the warmth inside the igloo caused the innermost layer of snow blocks to melt slightly, the extreme outer cold instantly refroze that moisture into a thin, continuous skin of solid inner ice. This process welded the individual snow blocks together into a single, seamless, monolithic shell. Over time, the snow dome became structurally stronger, capable of withstanding heavy snowdrifts, ferocious wind forces, and even the weight of large animals moving across its roof without collapsing. Moisture management inside these dwellings was governed by another delicate physical principle. In an enclosed space occupied by several human beings, body heat and respiration constantly release moisture into the air. In a cold shelter, this humidity hits cold surfaces, condenses into water, and freezes into frost. If that frost drips onto clothing or fur bedding, it destroys their insulating value. In the snow dome, the parabolic curve of the inner ceiling guided any minor condensation droplets to slide smoothly down the curved walls toward the lower floor level, rather than dripping straight down onto the raised sleeping platform. The tiny ventilation hole at the apex of the dome created a gentle, natural chimney effect. Warm, moisture-laden air slowly escaped through the top vent, drawing fresh, dry outer air inward through the sunken entrance tunnel below. This continuous, low-level air exchange kept the interior living space surprisingly dry, preserving the integrity of the caribou skin bedding and preventing dangerous moisture buildup. Everything in this survival ecosystem was interconnected in a delicate balance. The hunter's harpoon relied on the strength of sinew sewn by his wife. The wife's sewing relied on the bone needles shaped by the craftsman. The craftsman's tools relied on the ivory harvested from the walrus, and the walrus hunt relied on the silent mobility of the skin boat and the loyalty of the dog team. No single technology functioned in isolation. It was a complete, integrated system of vernacular engineering, where a failure in one component compromised the survival of the whole. As the sun sank below the ocean horizon and the long night settled over the snow camp once again, the family gathered inside the warm dome around the soft glow of the qulliq. Outside, the sub-zero wind hissed across the hard sastrugi ridges, but inside, the air was warm, dry, and quiet. The heavy work of the day was done, The sealskin boots were hung above the lamp to dry, and the time had come for the most vital educational tool in Arctic history, the tradition of oral storytelling. To truly comprehend the sheer brilliance of this survival technology, one must imagine what occurred when a catastrophic winter storm descended across the northern tundra, the kind of record-breaking blizzard that returned once every 75 years to test the absolute limits of human endurance. The sky transformed into a dark, suffocating wall of gray as the ambient temperature plunged past 40, 50, and 60 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. The Arctic gale roared across the flat ocean ice at over 50 miles per hour, lifting fine snow crystals into a blinding vortex that erased all visibility beyond the length of an outstretched arm. Out on the open expanse, the wind carried a force strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet and drive sub-zero cold through the smallest defect in a coat seam. In temperatures like these, exposure meant death in a matter of minutes. Unprotected skin froze solid almost instantly, and the simple act of breathing unfiltered air burned delicate lung tissue. For early Western traders and frontiersmen trapped in standard wooden frame cabins or log shelters during such a storm, the experience was a desperate, terrifying ordeal. As the Arctic gale slammed into flat wooden walls, cold air forced its way through every microscopic gap in the timber joints. Drafts swept across the floorboards, instantly freezing liquid water standing in buckets near the hearth. Inside these cabins, the occupants burned through their firewood at a frantic pace, tossing log after log into iron stoves that glowed red-hot at their center, while remaining ice-cold 2 feet away. As the storm raged into its second and third day, wood supplies dwindled rapidly. Green or damp timber retrieved from outdoor piles refused to burn, producing thick, suffocating smoke that choked the living room while yielding almost no heat. Cold surfaces inside the cabin began to collect heavy coats of white frost as human breath condensed against the freezing walls. The air inside turned damp and bone-chilling. Occupants sat huddled under heavy wool blankets, wearing their thickest leather boots inside their own living rooms, watching their food stores freeze solid as the cold steadily conquered the interior of their home. Micro-hooks like this remind us of a fundamental truth. Nature does not bow to stubbornness, only to adaptation. Stay with us, because what was happening inside an Inuit snow house just a few miles away across the storm-swept sea ice seemed like an impossible miracle to anyone who had never witnessed it. When a traveler pulled himself through the low, sunken entrance tunnel of a snow dome during the height of that 75-year blizzard, he didn't step into a dark, freezing cave. As he emerged through the inner floor hatch, a wave of soft, dry warmth measuring 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit rolled over him. The air was quiet, completely sheltered from the screaming gale outside. The thick snow walls absorbed the roaring wind, deadening the storm into a distant, muffled hum that sounded like a gentle whisper. Inside, the family sat comfortably on the elevated caribou skin platform, dressed in light inner shirts, or resting with bare arms above their fur quilts. The golden flame of the qulliq burned steadily in its soapstone dish, throwing a warm yellow glow across the smooth, curved ceiling. A soapstone pot suspended above the lamp simmered with rich seal broth and tender meat, filling the room with a deep, savory aroma. High up in the dome, the translucent ice window caught the faint, cool daylight from outside and diffused it softly across the clean white walls. There was no desperation, no frantic burning of limited wood fuel, no fear of the storm outside. While the blizzard raged across the Arctic for a week on end, completely sealing off the hunting grounds and burying the sea ice in massive drifts, the family rested in safety, warmth, and complete security. They were not merely enduring the storm, they were thriving in its very epicenter. This extraordinary security in the face of brutal weather was backed by a rich cultural world that turned the long winter evenings into a vibrant center of learning, art, and community bond. Because the Inuit carried no written books across their nomadic journeys, their entire history, science, geography, and legal code were held within an intricate oral tradition passed down from generation to generation through the spoken word. After the evening meal was shared, boiled meat, thin strips of dried char, and warm broth passed from hand to hand, the elders took their place near the lamp. They recited long genealogies that traced family lineages back across many centuries and across thousands of miles of coastline. These recitations were not simple lists of names. They established rites of hospitality, trade partnerships, and family ties that spanned vast geographical distances. A hunter traveling to a completely unfamiliar camp hundreds of miles away could recite his ancestry to the local elders, instantly establishing his place within the community and securing food and shelter for his family. Alongside history came the profound spiritual stories that governed daily behavior and maintained social harmony. Central to their worldview was the account of Sedna, the great spirit of the seafloor who ruled over all ocean life. According to tradition, all seals, walruses, and whales originated from Sedna's hands. When human beings broke social rules, acted with selfishness, or wasted the flesh of harvested game, their wrongdoings manifested as dark tangles in Sedna's long hair at the bottom of the ocean. Angered by the mess, she would withhold the sea mammals, hiding them beneath the ice and bringing starvation upon the camps. To restore balance during times of famine, the camp relied on the angakuk, the spiritual leader or shaman. In dark, quiet sessions lit only by the low ember of the qulliq, the angakuk would enter a deep trance, traveling in spirit down to the floor of the ocean to visit Sedna. He would listen to her grievances, apologize for the community's missteps, and symbolically comb the tangles from her hair until she was appeased and released the game animals back to the breathing holes. While modern minds might view these accounts as simple mythology, they functioned as a highly effective ecological and social code. The rules associated with Sedna enforced absolute respect for harvested game, mandated the equitable distribution of food across the entire camp, and prohibited wasteful hunting practices. It was a conservation ethics system wrapped in spiritual narrative, ensuring that the community never over-harvested its limited resource base. Music and sound played an equally crucial role in sustaining morale through the dark polar winter. Central to every social gathering was the drum dance. The traditional drum was a broad, shallow hoop fashioned from driftwood or flexible bone, over which a thin, unhaired membrane of dried caribou skin or seal bladder was tightly stretched. Unlike Western drummers who strike the center of the drumhead, the player held the drum by a short handle and struck the heavy wooden rim using a short, padded stick, rotating the drum back and forth with his wrist. As the heavy, resonant beat echoed off the curved snow walls, the singer swayed rhythmically, chanting low, complex songs that recounted famous hunts, humorous personal failures, or deep emotional moments. The drum dance was also used as a brilliant system for resolving interpersonal conflicts within the camp. If two men had a bitter dispute over property or personal slights, they did not engage in violent physical fights, which could divide and weaken the small community. Instead, they challenged each other to a song duel. Before the assembled camp, each man sang humorous, satirical verses mocking his rival's shortcomings while drumming. The community judged the performance through laughter and applause, diffusing tension through art and restoring peace to the group without a single drop of blood being spilled. In addition to drum dancing, women practiced qulliq, a unique form of throat singing that existed nowhere else on Earth. Two women stood face to face, holding each other by the shoulders and leaning so close that their lips almost touched, breathing into each other's mouth cavity. Using guttural inhalations and exhalations, they produced rapid, interlocking rhythmic patterns that mimicked the natural sounds of the northern wilderness, the call of the snow bunting, the rushing of Arctic rivers, or the scraping of sled runners over hard ice. Qulliq was played as a friendly, competitive game. The singers maintained the intense, rapid rhythm until one of them lost her breath or broke into laughter, yielding the victory to her partner. For children sitting at the edge of the lamp's golden glow, entertainment was seamlessly fused with education. They played ajariq, an intricate string game where a single loop of braided sinew was wound around the fingers to create complex geometric shapes representing animals, kayaks, harpoons, and running caribou. As an elder demonstrated how to weave a specific string figure, he recited a matching story or chant that explained the hunting habits of the animal or the geography of a distant mountain pass. By mastering hundreds of distinct string patterns, children developed extraordinary spatial memory, fine motor control, and visual mapping skills, the exact mental faculties they would need as adults to navigate featureless ice fields and craft fine skin garments. The history and identity of adult women were permanently etched onto their bodies through Inuit, the traditional art of facial and body tattooing. Using a fine bone needle and a thread soaked in a mixture of seal oil and lamp soot, skilled tattoo artists stitched fine lines directly beneath the skin on the forehead, chin, hands, and arms. These geometric patterns were far more than simple decoration. They were sacred marks of passage that signaled a woman's maturity, skill in skin tailoring, and tribal identity. A woman bearing fine kikini was recognized across neighboring territories as a master of her craft, carrying the symbols of her heritage proudly upon her skin for her entire life. Preparing the next generation for survival began almost in infancy. A young boy was given miniature versions of adult tools, a tiny harpoon, a small bone knife, and his own small bow. He learned to endure the extreme cold by playing in the snow under the watchful eye of his grandfathers. Long before he was strong enough to hunt independently, he accompanied his father out onto the sea ice, sitting in absolute silence at a breathing hole for hours at a time, absorbing the discipline, patience, and subtle signs of the ice through direct observation. The day a young hunter harvested his very first seal marked a monumental turning point in his life and in the life of his camp. But the celebration that followed embodied the core philosophy of northern survival. According to custom, the meat and blubber from a boy's first catch were not kept by his own family. Instead, the entire animal was cut up and distributed completely among the other families in the camp, particularly the elderly and the widowed, who could no longer hunt for themselves. This custom taught the young provider a fundamental lesson that would guide his entire adult life. A hunter's true status was measured not by what he accumulated for himself, but by what he shared with his community. In a land where hunting success was inherently unpredictable and any man could face weeks of bad luck, private hoarding meant eventual starvation for everyone. Mutual generosity was the ultimate insurance policy. By sharing his first catch with others, the young hunter ensured that when he faced lean times in the future, his neighbors would share their harvest with him in return. Girls underwent an equally rigorous education under the guidance of their mothers and grandmothers. They learned to operate the igloo with speed and precision, scraping delicate animal membranes without tearing the valuable hide. They mastered the selection and preparation of sinew thread, learned to tend the qulliq without producing smoke, and practiced the complex geometric tailoring required to cut caribou pelts into warm, functional parkas. By the time a young woman reached adulthood, her hands possessed the skill required to keep a household warm, dry, and clothed in the harshest climate on Earth. This sophisticated way of life was the product of a deep, ancient heritage. The direct ancestors of today's Inuit are known to archaeologists as the qulliq people, who undertook a massive, rapid eastward migration from the Bering Sea coast across Arctic Canada and into Greenland roughly 1,000 years ago. Equipped with large skin boats, advanced toggling harpoons, dog sleds, and superior bow technology, the qulliq adapted seamlessly to changing Arctic climates, harvesting large sea mammals along the open ice edges. As the qulliq expanded across the northern coastlines, they encountered and eventually replaced an earlier, more ancient Arctic culture known as the Dorset, or Tunit. In Inuit oral history, the Tunit are remembered with quiet respect as a tall, remarkably strong, but gentle and shy people who lived in the far north before the qulliq arrived. Legends describe the Tunit as giant hunters who could lift massive boulders with their bare hands and carry whole walruses on their backs, yet lacked the flexible kayak technology and advanced dog teams of the qulliq. Over time, as climate conditions shifted and the qulliq culture expanded, the gentle Tunit vanished from the coastlines, leaving behind their stone tool sites and entering permanently into the oral legends of the north. Farther back still lay the story of Beringia, the vast ancient land bridge that connected Northeast Asia to Alaska during the last Great Ice Age, When sea levels dropped hundreds of feet below their modern marks, across thousands of years, nomadic hunting groups moved across this ice-free steppe, following herds of mammoth, bison, and caribou. Those who remained in the far north developed the foundational cold-weather survival skills that would eventually give rise to the qulliq culture and the modern Inuit. The family resting inside the warm snow dome during the blizzard were the direct heirs of over 10,000 years of continuous, unbroken cold-weather adaptation, the longest, most successful human struggle against extreme cold in the history of our species. As the severe blizzard finally exhausted its strength on the seventh day, the roaring wind died down to a gentle whisper, and the heavy overcast broke open to reveal a crisp, clear winter sky filled with dancing green ribbons of the northern lights. Inside the igloo, the qulliq burned bright, the dogs slept peacefully in their snow burrows outside, and the hunter prepared his gear for the morning hunt. Nature had thrown its absolute worst against human ingenuity, and human ingenuity had emerged untouched. When we examine this ancient survival system through the cold, objective lens of modern mechanical engineering and thermodynamics, the hard measurements revealed by comparative data are nothing short of astonishing. For centuries, Western observers assumed that surviving in extreme sub-zero environments required massive physical force-heavy timber structures, iron stoves, tons of coal, and endless piles of dense firewood. But when you place traditional frontier methods side by side with Inuit vernacular technology, the math tells a completely different story. Consider the thermal efficiency of the snow dome. During a severe polar storm with exterior ambient temperatures resting at 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, the interior living space of a well-built igloo, heated by a single soapstone qulliq, routinely maintained a stable temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit above zero. That represents a thermal differential of 110 degrees Fahrenheit, achieved entirely without burning a single stick of wood, a single lump of coal, or a single drop of refined oil. To achieve a similar temperature differential inside a standard single-walled frontier log cabin, Western settlers had to burn between 10 and 15 cords of dry hardwood over the course of a single winter season. A single cord of wood represents a stack 8 feet long, 4 feet high, and 4 feet deep, weighing roughly 2 tons. To secure that fuel, a frontier family had to spend hundreds of hours during the autumn months felling trees, hauling heavy timber across deep snow, and splitting wood with steel axes. The Inuit, operating on a treeless landscape, consumed 0 cords of wood. Their entire heating and cooking energy for an entire winter was derived from a few gallons of rendered animal blubber, a fuel source harvested directly from the same animals that provided their daily food, clothing, and tool materials. The total energy expenditure required to secure blubber through seal hunting was a small fraction of the caloric energy required to harvest, haul, and chop 15 cords of timber. The efficiency metrics of traditional winter clothing were equally remarkable. A complete 2-piece caribou hide suit including inner shirt, outer parka, trousers, boots, and mitts weighed between 7 and 10 pounds total. Yet this lightweight garment allowed a hunter to stand completely motionless on open ocean ice for 12 consecutive hours in sub-zero winds without experiencing hypothermia. In contrast, European winter expedition gear of the 18 and 1900s relied on heavy wool coats, thick canvas, and dense leather boots. A complete Western winter suit often weighed between 20 and 30 pounds when dry. More critically, when those wool and canvas layers absorbed body perspiration or outer moisture, they retained that water, increasing in weight and losing nearly 80% of their insulating capacity. Once damp wool froze in the Arctic air, it became stiff as iron, heavy as stone, and dangerously cold. The hollow hair insulation of caribou hide, combined with breathable fur tailoring and gut skin waterproofing, offered twice the thermal insulation at less than 1/3 of the weight, while shedding moisture automatically. Consider also the construction speed and material efficiency of the shelter itself. A skilled builder, working entirely alone in a blinding snowstorm with a single knife carved from whalebone, could construct a fully windproof, structurally sound, thermally insulated shelter capable of housing a family of 6 in less than 2 hours. The building material was free, infinitely abundant, self-insulating, and required zero transport energy, as it was harvested directly from the snowdrift beneath the builder's feet. When spring arrived and the camp moved, the shelter simply melted back into the ocean, without leaving a single trace of waste, pollution, or environmental degradation. It was a zero-waste, zero-carbon, highly sustainable architecture engineered out of frozen water. Furthermore, the resource utilization rate of harvested game stood at virtually 100%. When a seal, walrus, or whale was taken, no part was discarded as refuse. The meat provided high protein, vitamin C-rich nutrition. The blubber provided light, heat, and water, melting energy. The hide became boats, boots, rope, and shelter coverings. The sinew provided high tensile thread. The bones became rafters, sled runners, and tool handles. The internal organs became waterproof parkas and floats, and even the teeth and ivory were carved into fish hooks, goggles, and mechanical toggles. Compare this with conventional modern resource extraction, where massive amounts of raw material are discarded as slag, waste, or environmental contamination just to extract a single targeted component. The Inuit operating system was one of the most closed-loop, hyper-efficient human survival models ever demonstrated in history. If you have gained a new appreciation for the incredible ingenuity, physics, and resilience of traditional wilderness engineering, take a moment right now to hit the subscribe button for our channel. Click the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive historical analysis. Hit the like button and share this video with anyone who loves history, survival skills, or off-grid living. Your support is what keeps our channel producing these detailed, documentary-style accounts. The ultimate lesson buried within this remarkable history goes far beyond technical specs, structural geometry, or caloric math. It is a lesson in human philosophy and humility. For centuries, Western expansion was defined by an aggressive mindset of conquest, an attempt to conquer the wilderness, subdue nature, flatten the land, and force foreign building styles onto environments where they did not belong. When those rigid methods met the extreme reality of the high Arctic, they failed catastrophically. The Inuit succeeded because they adopted the exact opposite approach. They did not attempt to conquer the Arctic. They sought to understand it, move with its seasonal rhythms, and adapt to its laws. They did not view snow as an enemy to be scraped away, but as a warm, protective building material provided by the wind. They did not view the frozen ocean as an impassable barrier, but as a vast, smooth highway connecting hunting grounds. They did not view the seal as a simple commercial commodity, but as a living partner whose spirit deserved absolute respect and gratitude. By bending their minds to match the reality of their environment, rather than demanding that the environment bend to them, they transformed the most hostile territory on the planet into a secure, warm, and dignified home. Out of ice, bone, and skin, they built a rich civilization that endured unbroken for thousands of years without depleting its resource base or destroying its fragile ecosystem. It is vital to understand that this extraordinary culture is not a dead artifact preserved only in dusty history books or museum displays. The Inuit are a vibrant, living people today, numbering over 180,000 individuals across their ancestral homelands in Greenland, Arctic Canada, Alaska, and the Chukotka Peninsula of eastern Siberia. In the 21st century, they continue to speak their native languages, govern their own vast autonomous regions like Nunavut, maintain their ancient oral traditions, and hunt across the same ocean ice their ancestors navigated for thousands of years. While they have thoughtfully integrated modern tools like GPS navigators, snowmobiles, and modern communication technology into daily life, the foundational knowledge, the deep understanding of ice safety, animal behavior, wind reading, weather signs, and communal sharing remains alive, passed down from elders to youth in northern communities every single day. Today, as the global climate shifts rapidly and Arctic ice thins at unprecedented rates, the Inuit find themselves once again on the front lines of human environmental survival. The ancient skills of reading sastrugi wind ridges, identifying stable multi-year ice, and predicting volatile weather are being tested by shifting environmental patterns that no living generation has seen before. Yet the core resilience that allowed their ancestors to master the Ice Age remains unbroken. Their ongoing story is a powerful testament to the enduring strength of human adaptability, the depth of indigenous science, and the timeless wisdom of living in harmony with the natural world.